Sometimes, when you end up watching an anime, especially a good anime, you can get emotionally charged while watching it. You can get invested, you can get excited and disappointed all at the same time. It's one of the reasons why I like watching them so much. I like having emotional roller coasters that can pull you this way and that until you eventually arrive at the end. But, as I so often say, the ending is paramount. Does the ending make you feel like you want to ride the roller coaster again? Were you disappointed by the ride, thinking, that's it? Perhaps even with thoughts of, well, what if this? Or were you pleasantly content with the ride? You might not be so excited to want to ride it again immediately, but maybe after a little while, yeah, you want to ride it again. The show we are talking about today is a show that I was much hyped for before its release. There were many elements in the promotional material that I was interested by, the studio was a good pick, and the staff ranged from good to great. I had high hopes for it overall, and indeed there were many of people that spent most of the season in which it was airing proudly proclaiming that it was a good contender for Best Anime of 2016. It is a claim that, while I'm not going to attempt to counter it, it's not what I would use to describe it. Hopefully I can explain what I mean. Ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection. Today, the 2016 anime from A1 Pictures, Erased. Let's jam. First, for the sake of this video, let me point out that I actually have to spoil some things from the first 3 episodes in order just to be able to talk about the show. But this is the kind of series that is best watched without any prior knowledge. Considering that, I will inform you that at the very least this series has a full recommendation to at least watch it from me, so you should probably go and do that. Go, be free, and then when you're done watching it, come back, and we'll start talking about it. Now, one of my favorite aspects of the show is that it has this very particular kind of time travel. However, the show is not technically about time travel, it just has that as an aspect. It's actually a murder mystery with sci-fi and supernatural elements. You see, in this world 18 years ago, there were a string of disappearances and murders. And as it turns out, the killer was never caught and is still out on the streets, a danger to everyone, and we'll get back to that. The sci-fi time travel twist is that our main character, Satoru, has the ability to travel backwards in his own time slightly, usually only by a few minutes, to help stop disasters. He cannot control this power, and it happens to him randomly, but because of it, he is able to save lives. Unfortunately, by the end of episode 1, he himself is accused of the murder of his own mother, and apparently, in order to stop it, his power just doesn't send him back a few minutes, an hour, or even a day. It sends him back 18 years into his elementary school self, hinting that this is where it all began. So Satoru is stuck in his childlike body, trying to solve the known disappearance of his classmate, a young girl named Hinazuki, before it even happens. Unfortunately for him, it's not like he was deeply researching the case before traveling back, so he knows almost nothing. He remembers scattered amounts of information, but nothing about who the villain in the scenario actually is. This leaves him trying to piece things together from the ground up. Personally, I think what he should have done is started talking with his mom, because besides being one of the best supporting characters ever and MVP for the whole show, I feel like she knew more about everything than she let on. Now, the time travel aspect of the show is mostly forgotten the majority of the time. Past the initial episode, it only activates maybe 2 or 3 times again, and Satoru has absolutely zero control over it. So it's almost like its own character. It's like an omnipotent god that takes joy and pity on Satoru, but does make sure to send him where he needs to go to do the most amount of good. The problem I have with Erased is that it is predictable, which kind of goes against the reasons as to why I enjoy time travel stories so much. Usually in time travel stories, the mere fact that time travel is involved adds this whole layer of unpredictability to it. Yeah, you might be able to peg some outcomes if you're good at it, but even if you do, the journey to those outcomes are rarely predictable in and of themselves. This is all in part because, as I mentioned, Erased is a murder mystery. Because of that, there are set formulas, and if you've seen enough of them, you've more or less seen all of them. And that's what I felt here, because In the entirety of the show, there were only about 2 times where I was thrown for a loop. And while I will admit those 2 were effective when they happened, the majority of twists the show had I called long before they happened. Now, that's not to say that I didn't enjoy that. I do get a certain amount of pleasure at being able to predict these things beforehand. But as much as I enjoy that, I enjoy being so woefully wrong so much more. Another problem with the murder mystery aspect of the show is that our protagonist doesn't actually try to solve the mystery all that much. He gets thrown back in time to save several people from death with hopes of making their certain deaths quite uncertain, but rather than attempt to find the culprit before the incidents take place, he seems to be content with just protecting the victims and moving them out of where the timeline says they're supposed to be when they die. This is rather depressing considering how easy the overall mystery is to figure out, because the plot only lines up so many options. For the animation, can I just say that this show looks really, really good. That's A1 Pictures for you. From the Sakuga to the way that they made the series widescreen for that cinematic look, I found it all to be quite nice. I did worry for a while though that, as good as the show is, something might happen to make the production take a downturn. A1 also produced 2 other series in the same season, being the second season to Dake, as well as Haita Genso no Grimga. And they've also had a history of shows being good at the start before quickly shitting the bed. Thankfully, that did not turn out to be the case here, and out of all the things they did this season to skimp out on, Erased was not one of them. Now, with the music, I'm just going to briefly say that I think the opening was amazing. The song was addictive and I watched it every time, but I want to move more quickly into talking about the soundtrack because something happened here that I didn't expect. You see, because of some weird happenstance, I never actually looked up the composer of the show before watching it. But then I watched it, I loved the music, and thought to myself, you know, I'm gonna have to look up who did all of this. And then I did, and when I found out it was Yuki Kajiura, my mind was blown. In retrospect, after this realization, I re-listened to the soundtracks, and I could actually hear hints of her style in the music. Just a little peppering here and there to make me think, oh yeah, no, totally, she did this. But I didn't recognize it on sight. And considering that recently my biggest problem with Kajiura's music is that it has become somewhat samey and repetitive over the last number of shows that I watched that she worked on, this is a massive improvement. Like, I miss the days of her experimental music with like the Dot Hack series, and while I did enjoy the kind of epic scale she had with things like Madoka and Fate and Ka no Kyokai, I wanted something different after all that. And this was it. There are tracks that dig back into her roots with experimentation, sounds not usually heard in work like this, and a heavy emphasis on music that sounds heavy. The percussion in Erased's soundtrack brings things down to a dark and serious level, but not like she's done before. Even in the few upbeat and hopeful melodies is this sinister, low howl that keeps everything grounded in the serious reality that the show takes place in. And it was fabulous. My compliments to the composer. A part of me wonders what kind of series Erased was attempting to be. It advertised in many places that it was part of the mystery genre, and early on it had many elements to match, but it wasn't necessarily good at it. What it was good with, thankfully, was suspense. There was always this sense of danger that the characters faced due to the impending unknown. When Satoru saves someone, he no longer knows how the events are going to play out because time has changed. He hopes and prays that everything will turn out all right, but we, the audience, know that is not meant to be. And we are either cautiously or excitedly waiting for the other shoe to drop. That right there is the draw for the show, and it's what makes this series an entertaining watch, even when the mystery fails to connect properly. It's so much better with things like Satoru trying to be a hero, looking up to Sentai characters as role models, and by the end of the show giving him a villain so that he can do just that, be a hero. I do have more thoughts on this, however, so be sure to check out after the credits for some of the more spoilery thoughts that I have in a section I like to call the spoiler room. But for now, with everything in mind, I present Erased with the recommendation to buy it rather than stream. I will admit that I debated with myself for quite a while over giving it a certified Frosty out of the gate because I did enjoy it so much, but with how the mystery was handled, it gave me pause. Perhaps at the end of the year, when I look at 2016 in retrospect, I will award it a Frosty, but for now, it's still worthy of a place on your shelf. Despite, of course, how expensive that might end up being. This is because at the time of this video, Erased has been licensed by Aniplex of America with what I assume to be a home video release upcoming eventually. And knowing their pricing strategies, the series won't be coming cheap. You can, however, stream the series on a variety of different locations, as it is offered on both Crunchyroll and Funimation's websites, which personally I found rather interesting. Also interesting is that in both locations, the series is available to watch entirely for free and not locked behind either of their paywalls. At least not yet. For alternate anime recommendations, I first point you towards one of my favorite mystery anime of all time, Higurashi no Nakukoro ni. If you haven't seen it yet, it is quite a bit more violent than Erased ever gets, but the mystery is oh so much sweeter. And with the second season of it finally being licensed recently, this is as good a time as any to go and pick it up. The second recommendation goes to Steins Gate. Predictable, I know, but if you're going to start recommending a show with a time travel element, Steins Gate has to be mentioned. It would be like a crime or something to do otherwise. So between those two, you should hopefully find something to your liking. And that's it from me. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, follow me on Twitter if you feel so inclined, and hey, if you like what I do here and feel like helping out, please consider going and checking out my Patreon page, and if you feel it within your heart, also consider donating. Very special thanks to Samuel Fombolita, Matt G7, Joshua Garcia, Lulika Adachi, Grace Anderson, Nikolai Gray, and Victor Ekmark for donating already. You are all exceedingly amazing, and I thank all of you. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, unless you're staying behind after the credits, stay frosty. Oh boy, welcome to the spoiler room, everyone. This is the part of the video where I can vent some thoughts and possible frustrations about the series in question that are a bit more spoilerific in nature. If you want to avoid spoilers, you have until the end of this sentence to stop the video and move on. You have been warned. So, now, let's dive into the main reveal of the mystery, the teacher Yashiro as the killer. I mentioned earlier that the series was predictable, and this was the main point that I was referring to. This reveal wasn't really a twist, because the series didn't actually give us many options as to who the killer could have ended up being. If you watch your fair share of police procedural shows, you'll know that the villain of any crime is not one that just magically comes out of nowhere. It's one that is introduced to you fairly early on. The villain, with few exceptions, is someone you know from a very early point in the story, because they have to be. There comes a fine line when writers want to make their villains unguessable, because motive is key. You can't have a brilliant thriller like this with a villain who comes out of nowhere and kills randomly without any connection to the victims. Whoever is doing the killing has to be part of the story. Now, the best way to actually dodge this is to provide the chance for multiple culprits. One of my favorite examples of this is the 80s adaptation of the board game Clue. In it, you could provide actual examples and theories as to why every single character in that film was the murderer. And all of those explanations that you come up with would not be entirely incorrect. The film even has multiple endings to showcase this. But Erased didn't do that. There's no real alternate characters for the villain, not even really any misdirection as to who the villain is. In fact, by the end, the show feels like it's almost given up on the mystery altogether and just comes into a black and white battle of good versus evil and how good will prevail because it always does. Not that this is necessarily a bad way to go, but when they spend so much time developing the mystery, the final reveal wasn't as poignant as I would have hoped. Another thing that really bothered me is that the origins of Satoru's power never really got explained. This is not like Steins Gate where you witness the first event that they use their power. He's already had it for a while, and I would have thought that him getting the power was very important, but it's not something that is ever touched on. It's just kind of there, which is depressing because I would have loved to see the origins of it and how it came to be. They explain at the end after Yashiro has been put away that his power never again activates, which would lead me to assume that he only got this power to solve this one mystery. And if that is the case, why was he even given the power beforehand? Why give it to him early and not just when his mother was killed so that he could go back the 18 years and so forth? Sure, I guess you could argue that it was to acclimatize him or the audience to these powers before going full on and sending him back those 18 years, but it wasn't absolutely necessary that we had that small scale example. It didn't need to happen. I almost would have liked it if the final epilogue scene was just him walking along with his power activating again like it used to, letting him know that he is a hero and he still has much work to do. No such luck, unfortunately, but it would have been a cool ending. Oh, and side note, did anybody else think that the change in opening for episode 11 was amazing? Because he got erased in a show called Erased. It's funny, damn it! And if you have your own thoughts on how the ending went, creatively let me know down in the comments so as not to spoil people who somehow haven't watched the show yet. And as usual, before you comment, leave your mangas and light novels at the door. And until next time, stay frosty, everyone.